Basically, the layout was supposed to be like this, but as I said, I'm going to cut things out. There are three main things that I wanted to mention here. First of all, a little bit about the background of this research initiative that we'll be talking about more or less the whole morning and a good deal of this afternoon. There will be no need to repeat the things that you've already been listening to, but just perhaps for the sake of the members of the audience who did not attend the morning session, I literally just summarize a couple of main points, giving you the main background so that you can contextualize what we are actually talking about. The central point of my presentation is obviously this ideological aspect of forms of address. We talked a lot about, and we had a lot of presentations focusing on aspects of politeness, culture-specific communicative styles, directness, indirectness, and so on and so forth, which is all, of course, very valid. But, you know, the study that I did a couple of decades ago, as a matter of fact, led me to a conclusion that that is not necessarily always enough. And at least in that part of the world that I belong to, a couple of decades ago, which was Eastern Europe, which was former Yugoslavia, led me to believe that perhaps we needed an extra dimension. We needed to sort of include an extra dimension into this, and perhaps to talk about the ideological aspect. So I kind of, I don't know, came up with this concept of ideology-based versus class-based continuum. And again, as Professor Kurteš mentioned many times, this is really very much, you know, about the continuum. There are no clear-cut divisions. I'm going to present again just one slide, couple of points, what happened basically with that study back in the 90s, but also, you know, for some reason, sort of, it was almost spontaneous, if I may say so. I was kind of wondering, okay, is this ideological bit completely dead? Is it worth revisiting it, exploring it again, and seeing what is going on with these ideology-based forms of address? 20 years on, we are talking about this sort of post-1989 state and so on and so forth. Is it worth exploring it? And when I sort of, you know, had a look at stuff, I realized, yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. So basically my last point, but I would probably like to save it for the discussion. Okay, where next for these ideology-based forms of address, such as comrade? Are they still there? Should we bother about them? What is going on with them, basically? Are there any emerging patterns, and what should we do about that? So again, very, very brief. What is this research initiative in the wider sense of the word? We had a few presentations that actually belong to this. So there is, as I said, you know, a lot of initiatives happening within our network. We are European Network for Intercultural Education Activities, and there is this very, very general initiative, research initiative that we tentatively called, or what sort of, you know, is the working title of it, is Daily Interaction Across Languages and Cultures. Phase one, or the first step of it, is forms of address. We needed to start from somewhere. Several countries are involved. We heard already some presentations from various ones. More are hopefully to come. And again, it is undertaken by us. There is a website. If you want to visit it, please do. We heard this morning there are individual presentations talking about the methodological issues, talking about the starting point, initial premises, the methodological issues, the theoretical considerations. I don't think I need to specifically talk about that. Could I just again refer you to the latest publication that is out by Larina and Suryanarayan, 2012. But of course there are other, in terms of theoretical at least, issues already mentioned many times: Hofstede, Leach, Brown and Gilman, and so on. Something, if you allow me just to sort of draw attention to this, very close to my heart. I'm a very fervent contrastivist, so I definitely, you know, always want this aspect, particularly, you know, in terms of theoretical and methodological approaches, contrastive analytical school, European contrastive analytical school, more specifically Polish and more specifically Poznań, Fiszak and Krzeszowski, and so on and so forth. Methodology, again, we talked about what sort of things. There's a mixture of things. If I may suggest to our discussant, could we tackle this issue of methodology again later? Because I think there may be some issues that we would like to perhaps explore, or perhaps come to some sort of conclusion, because there are problems. There are problems there. So just a quick kind of suggestion, if I may. Okay, the actual focus of my research, as I said, there are things quite some time ago, actually more than I'm prepared to admit, that I first actually visited this issue. I've started, as I suppose we all do or did, Brown and Gilman 61. That's really what we all kind of do when we want to do terms of address, forms of address. That's basically it. I'm sure you're all familiar with this reciprocal and non-reciprocal, you know, basic distinction, which is absolutely fine and which absolutely worked well from my data back then as well. But I all of a sudden realized, well, hang on a minute, it's not just title plus last name or title plus, it's not just that, it's not just the title, because I realized that back then, at the beginning of the 90s, I was already dealing with two kinds of titles, as it were. So it was obviously the old comrade thing. But what I noticed, what was emerging, or what was reappearing, if you would, was the Mr., Mrs., or Madam, Sir, and so on and so forth. And I said, well, I can't just put them all together under, I don't know, here or there. I need to do something with it. So that was basically my suggestion. Well, how about then introducing this continuum? You know, that was the point when I realized that I perhaps need an additional dimension. This is not about solidarity. This is not about collectivism versus individualism. This is not about politeness versus whatever. This is something else. And I also noticed, and perhaps that's also prompted this approach, you know, why it would be useful to see it as a continuum. I noticed that some forms of address, title plus the T form, title plus the informal kind of way, appeared, you know, sort of discoursally or I don't know, pragma-semantically, they kind of appeared as more neutral. Yeah, I do not want to kind of commit myself. I do not want to call you either comrade or sir, but I sort of want to kind of stay away from that, and I want to devise a term that would kind of, you know, keep me safe. So a lot of kinship terms. Okay, yes, we all know, again, in various other languages, we talked about Indian English and so on, things like, I don't know, sister, brother, and whatever. But I noticed there are many more, things like neighbor. Very popular in the late 80s and early 90s, very popular, particularly in Belgrade, sort of everyday kind of, you know, daily interaction. People who don't know each other addressing, calling each other neighbor, excuse me, neighbor. I'm not your neighbor, why are you calling me that? But basically this sort of let me, or I don't know, suggested to me that this is some sort of continuum, and they can perhaps be seen as neutral, ideologically neutral. Very, very brief, again, I don't necessarily need to go into details, but this is how I saw this, this continuum. So on the one end of the spectrum, which I would call class-based, again, feel free to criticize me, would be the sort of things like Madam, Miss, Mr, and so on. That would be the title plus last name or first name and V forms, so to more polite forms. The other end of the spectrum, which I would like to call ideology-based, kind of belonging to all communist style, would be comrade. Again, last name or first name, T forms, and so on. And something in between, okay, these kinship terms, you know, neighbor or whatever, and various other things, just last name or just first name or simply nothing. You know, simply addressing, excuse me, without anything. So this is what I talk about. This is what I mean by ideology-based or class-based. Ideology-based to the old kind of communist, which was mandatory. You had to absolutely address, particularly in formal situations. I'm sure you're all aware of that. That was the form of address. In formal situations, you had to address people, comrade, so and so. And what I would call class-based, again, feel free to criticize me, but I just had to give them some names, Mr., Mrs., Miss, or Madam, Sir, and so on and so forth. I would like to give this example. I'm, again, fully aware of the time. I would like to give this example that basically prompted the whole thing. This is from the 90s, early 90s. This was the radio show that I was listening to, early 90s, Belgrade radio station. A discussion between the radio presenter and a guest. So it wasn't a kind of celebrity guest or a politician. It was just an, I don't know, a guy sort of who was about to set up his private business, sort of talking about these things. So just a chat show, very, very informal. So they were about to start, and the radio presenter basically said, okay, Mr. or Comrade Petrovic, should I call you basically, you know, Gospodin ili drug Petrovic? And the guy replied, it doesn't really matter. I'm not really bothered. You know, you can call me whatever you want. I'm not a member of any political party. So that was early 90s. That's how it was. Yes, you can call me whatever you want. It doesn't really matter, because that was the meaning. That's the direction in which comrade versus sir kind of seemed to have gone, in a sense. Or had gone, rather. That was the case back then. And as I said, you know, I sort of checked the situation, and again, I came to certain conclusions and so on. Now, fast forward, current situation. Okay, so I thought, well, then that's sort of done and dusted. Is it worth ever sort of revisiting again? You know, what, 20 years on, comrade, is it still there? You know, do we still sort of, you know, address each other? Is there a context in which it is still feasible, and so on? To cut the long story short, I wouldn't be probably doing this presentation if the answer was no, it's gone. It's absolutely dead. No, it is still there. Very, very limited, very difficult in a sense to find real examples, proper examples, but it is actually there. And this is what is basically happening with it. Okay, so the premise is that it was either gone or it still may be there. Yes. Certain patterns happen to be emerging that I noticed particularly in media language. So some sort of formal, you know, there is some sort of, you know, I wouldn't call it necessarily kind of informal daily interaction. I would sort of say that I noticed that in certain formal kind of speech, particularly media language, either electronic media or print media, I can still find these things. It took me a while, it was really digging deep, but all of a sudden I realized, this is what is going on. Can I please draw your attention specifically to this second example? And I really try to be very brief, but it is so context dependent that I simply need to tell you a little bit more about this. This is the translation, so Mira's book. I'll tell you who Mira is. Mira's book instigated sort of the get-together of, now the question is who? This is the original. Mirina knjiga okupila drugove. Now this was the title of a news item that all of a sudden I realized, well, wait a minute. So Mira's book instigated or whatever, the get-together of, Now, who is Mira and who could be those comrades/friends? Now, Mira is Mirjana Marković, the wife of Slobodan Milošević, the former president of Serbia. She's in Russia for a number of years. She got a political asylum there. So she left the country. She's got political asylum in Russia. She's there. Now she still publishes. She's sort of very active. Publishes all kinds of things, kind of reflective literature and whatever. And she launches her books in Serbia. Now she can't attend these things because, as I said, you know, as a refugee, basically, she can't go back. But there are still her political, if you would, affiliates. She was quite a prominent figure of a very kind of hardcore leftist party, sort of communist party, whatever, you know, back in Milošević's time, she got her own party. And she was sort of quite active in that area. Now, her friends, or comrades, actually now organize these events. And this was the launch of her book. You can see some of those comrades/friends. I particularly like this one. Because I suppose appropriately some of them dozed off and everything, but this was basically it. Now, what I'm trying to say, one of the emerging patterns, I mean, this actually triggered the whole thing. One of the emerging patterns, in my opinion, is, okay, yes, it has survived. Pragma-semantically very, very limited, in a very sort of limited form. It reinvented itself. Comrade basically reinvented itself, if you would, reconceptualized itself. And the basic meaning, or the key meaning, the dominant meaning is sarcastic. So there are these emerging patterns, I would say most prominent of which is this one, when you want to create this sort of ambiguity. Now what I missed, I should have told you obviously, in particular Serbian is one of these languages, but I believe in some other as well. Macedonian is, I believe, another example. The word drug, which would be you know what comrade means, is polysemic. It can mean comrade, but it can mean a friend as well. So this is why the ambiguity has been created deliberately, but the reading that you get is actually very, very sarcastic. That is the main, okay, her book sort of instigated the get-together of, who are they? Well, they are comrades. To all of us who know them, they're comrades. They are, in other words, they belong to the old establishment. You can see sort of how they look. So they're basically comrades. But yes, they're friends as well. They're friends of Mira. So you know, what exactly does the title mean? So yes, her book instigated the get-together of who? And I noticed a lot of these things. Again, just a very, very quick example, literally just to have a look at the actual example. This is the actual word. A similar comment, you know, these are comments basically to a news item on a very similar topic. Okay, podvig je starih drugova, old friends or old comrades, under quotation marks, under inverted commas. So again, you know, it is also very, very sarcastic. All comrades or all friends. And this is one of the emerging patterns. There are more, but obviously I need to stop here because we are very much pushed for time. I would like to be able to say a bit more later on, but this is basically what is going on. I'm going to more or less leave it here. Basically what I just said, it appears to have managed to sustain its presence, basically. So I would say that this old title, you know, ideology-based title, drug, comrade, appears still to be there. Obviously completely reconstituting itself, but it is there. It is there. The dominant pragma-semantic meaning is sarcasm, mockery, irony. And of course, where next? Well, we'll see what we can do, but I would really like to see what is going on in other Eastern European countries. I've already mentioned Macedonia. It just really, that's a sort of fresh of the, you know, hot of the press. A colleague from Macedonia who worked on a similar topic is willing to re-investigate what is going on, so we might be doing something together on a similar issue. References are all there in your handouts as well. And thank you very much, or as they would say in Serbia, hvala na pažnji.